One thing I wanted to ask you, and I've been thinking through this a bit lately, is the claim skeptics make extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Mhm.
And I wanted to share with you my thoughts and then get
Okay.
your take on it.
Yeah.
So my take is there's two things they could mean by that. One is it's extraordinary because it's supernatural, in which case the claim is really supernatural claims require supernatural evidence. And to me, that's not going anywhere because it's like, well, what supernatural evidence do you
Yeah.
expect? Should God appear in the sky every 10 years to remind us that the resurrection really happened?
Yeah.
So, to be generous, the more reasonable claim for them to be making would be because so much rides on this claim. It's extraordinary because of the eternal implications of it. And in that case, I think the way you draw analogies to these court cases is really important because you might think, well, is a murder an extraordinary claim? And they might say no, and you might say, but wait a minute, think of the implications. You're putting a man in jail who's accused of murdering somebody for a really long time, potentially his life. That's going to affect his kids if he has any, his wife if
Yeah.
he has any, the rest of his family. So the implications, it's an extraordinary claim. So you better have some pretty darn good evidence that it's the case. And I think you can do the same thing with Jesus. And in these court cases, each piece of evidence might not seem so extraordinary on its own, but built as a cumulative case, it doesn't necessarily leave you with a reasonable alternative.
Yeah, I think you're right in trying to get the definition of what they mean by extraordinary. So if what you mean by extraordinary is that but you could be like you're saying, just that they think this has got extraordinary gravity. It's a grave issue. It's an important issue. But I sometimes wonder if they're talking about the nature of the kind of evidence. So you're right if you're saying, well, okay, so because this is an extraordinary claim, I would need what qualifies as extraordinary? You mean the evidence has to be otherworldly? Okay, could we even define that? How would we even know? That means you were just excluding any possibility of proving it because we don't have access to otherworldly things. We're trying to prove the existence of an otherworldly thing. So I think that doesn't really go anywhere. But I think what they really mean is that the weight of the evidence, that the amount of evidence, that the case should be extraordinarily locked tight, that it should be, in some way. But I would always say this: we build evidence even for, and I think murders are extraordinary, especially if you look at the number of murders that will occur annually in a state like California, or even in Chicago, let's say, where you think, well, gosh, there's all kinds of murders happening in Illinois. Well, the state of Illinois, if you were to look at it, you'd see that really for people who are living and dying of normal causes in Illinois, very few are murdered, okay? And sometimes these are extraordinary events in the terms of how the murder occurs. I had a murder in California, and we don't, even though we have a lot of murders, we have a lot more people than we have murders. So the percentage of murders per person in California is extraordinarily low, not compared to other states perhaps, but just in general terms. The percentage is incredibly low given how many people there are. And then the kinds of murder. I had a murder with a garrote, which is a strangulation device. I did a search nationally to figure out, could I ask anybody, has anybody had a garrote murder of this nature? My gosh, this was like in the 1% of the 1% of murders. I mean, it was like ridiculously low. Now, okay, so this is an extraordinary claim. You think that this guy built a garrote when nobody does that, using materials, by the way, which were unbelievably unwise to build a garrote, very, very rare. Why would you even use those materials? And committed a murder of this nature, which is extraordinarily rare. Okay, this is an unusual case. But it turns out that I build that case in front of a jury the same way I build any case. The same forms of evidence, the same kinds of interviews, the same kinds of observations about behavior. Everything's exactly the same as you would build it if you were doing a residential burglary. It's the same forms and types of evidence built in the same way, even though this crime, compared to residential burglary, is incredibly rare. It's extraordinary. So it turns out that we use very ordinary evidence to prove extraordinary claims about extraordinary events. And that happens all the time. And I think that for the most part, if you look at it this way, if you want me to believe that the universe we live in came into existence from nothing, that all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing, without a cause, it just came into existence from nothing. And there's lots of atheists who would say that's the case. And that in addition to that, the fine tuning we see is just a coincidence. And they might argue there's a number of multiverses, and we are just one of those multiverses. Okay, where's the evidence for that? In other words, it's not as though the Christian is the only one making extraordinary claims. And then we say, well, what kind of evidence would you use to demonstrate the existence of a multiverse? To demonstrate that this kind of universe could come into existence from nothing, that it could actually initiate life from non-life and actually account for the information we see in DNA, would actually account for the appearance of design that even Richard Dawkins says is in biology, that could somehow materially present a series of events that could result in the immaterial mind, which is free to make free agent choices. Look, what I'm saying is, those are extraordinary claims of what space, time, and matter can do without any agency. Okay, and they're going to say, well, yes, we can make those claims, though, using all the scientific processes we use to prove that this set of glasses is falling into my hands. Really? Okay. If you don't have to use extraordinary evidence to prove your extraordinary claims, then allow me not to have the same burden, because I think in the end, I would agree, we can make a case for your position as a naturalist and for my position as a supernaturalist with the same kinds of evidence, taking the same approach.